Well, hello and good morning, everybody. How you doing? This is Jeremiah. We are having a webinar on some irrigation standards and a discussion of standards and all that. Um, I actually have a very quick, little funny little uh, it would it be an allegory or a metaphor? I don't know, but just we had donuts today. Someone brought in donuts and got me thinking. That was good. This should be our new standard. we should, we should have donuts every Friday. And but think about that. Like, really, are we going to write that down? Is that actually the new standard? And then now, of course, other people are going to chime in. Maybe it should be every other Friday, and you get this committee rule where it just mesticizes into this craziness. Doesn't have a budget and all that. And it really is kind of a funny way to think about it. At least was to me, and because that's very much the sorts of things we're going to get into over this next hour, because a lot of these things we're covering are, why is this way, and especially with an organization like Department of Transportation, the thing we hear a lot is just don't ask. So when it comes down to it, you got to match standards. You got to match these CAD standards, whether or not it's a good standard or not. And the fact that it's a standard actually is what makes a good standard. It's just as long as something is set, and that's kind of what we're going to be getting into. Get some pretty neat stuff to cover. I was going to tell you a couple quick things about this little interface of the webinar. Please note that Q&A button at the bottom. Question and answer. I even recommend go ahead and clicking it now, get it situated, because you're going to be able to see the answered questions that other people are asking. But also, just at any point when you have a question, please go ahead and type that in. We're going to get those queued up, and we'll definitely get to answering all of your questions. It's always just handy if we get the questions earlier rather than later. So just go ahead and click that now. Get ready to type in your questions. This is being recorded, so you are going to be able to watch this again if necessary. So that's all of my yibber yabbering. I'm sure Jake is ready to go. So let me get this handed over to Jake.
Very good. Thanks, Jer. Great donut analogy. So I just wanted to start with a few little messages, we'll call them. My hope for this webinar is to have both sides, and I do see a lot of familiar faces attending right now, and I see both sides of the spectrum here. So not only those who are doing the work and need to match these standards, but those who are actually requiring those standards. So this is going to be trying to encompass both sides of that spectrum. And this is just such a great opportunity to discuss these processes and these standards and really to learn from each other. So we will say this is a safe space. This is somewhere where we would love the input. We would love the back and forth in the chat there. And then any questions that you guys have, like Jared said, please get those in. We'll try to answer those. But as far as the chat is concerned, I want you guys to chat amongst yourselves. Let's ask what your guys's or other people's experiences are and what we've had and the frustrations that we're going through. This is just one of those things that I'm hoping that this is kind of one of those eye openers that we can just sort of improve upon. So before going any further, I wanted to just say this is a safe space. So we are all good friends here. So we are going to, that is me right there, deal a lot with the training and stuff like that. So the outline that we want to talk today about is definitely just what and why we have standards, how we actually adopt those standards from other people, and really things to think about when looking at what we need to change and how to make those changes and how we maintain those changes and all that kind of stuff. And questions, definitely not clear to the end, but if you have them, please send them in. So getting right into it, standards. I'm going to ask 3 different questions, and this is something that, again, on both sides of the spectrum, we should be asking ourselves. why, what, and how. So why do we have standards? And why do we need standards? Really, this should be pretty common sense of what we're trying to achieve here, but being able to keep things organized, really having some way to be consistent with how we produce things. And then we've heard the term, I'm sure, boilerplate, something that we can just get a kickoff from a specific starting point and have a lot of it already pre-done for us, that we don't have to recreate the wheel every time. And another reason why, let's just look at our friend Tom. Let's call him Tom here. We don't want to be frustrated as we do our work. We definitely want to be able to have somewhat of a seamless, whatever that looks like, workflow. Having a poor standard is definitely going to frustrate not only the people managing it and trying to enforce it, but those who have to try to use it. So what are your standards? That should just be a question across the board. And this is not geared towards, again, the people who are enforcing and sort of putting out those standards, but it's also to kind of reflect internally with your office of what your standards are too. Because if you have to adopt somebody else's workflow for a project or two, then how in the world are you going to do that if you don't have a flexible standard to begin with? So it doesn't have to be on the other person, but it should be a two-way street there. And then how do you update those standards? How do you maintain those standards? So really we talk about the standard is something to keep things organized, but if you think about it, a way to describe what standards are is really a process for updating your standards. So it's more of an action. It's, if I have a standards, it's the process and how I can go about that. And Jer's donut analogy fits right in with this, but it should not be static. It should absolutely be something that can change and should change. Things improve on a day-to-day basis. Everything that we start to do, there's always something newer and better coming out. And to be able to roll with those and say, you know what, I really like this look, or you know what, we should have donuts every other week because that is more healthy than every day. But this is going to be our new standard. And so being able to take that and adopt that into what you're currently doing in workflow is, it's kind of like this that I found. See those guys putting up those huge, we'll call them tally marks, and a guy goes, you know what, we could tally things like this. So what's easier? Is it sticking with the old way because that's how we know how to do it, or that's what we're most familiar with? Or do we look at improving those? If you can't be flexible or back up why, it's not a good standard. And just across the board, what we've seen across multiple firms and people sending in examples and frustrations is it's really hard to defend a standard when it can't adopt or adapt to other situations. So going further into, you know, what a good standard really consists of is how easy is it to read? What kind of efficiency are you gaining from the processes that you're doing? What you do get through, is it actually accurate? How do you know that it's accurate? A huge one is the learning curve. When you start to hire people, and this is again on both sides of the spectrum, when you're either bringing somebody on to do or help a project and they got to learn your standards, how easy is it for them to pick up? Or is it just like pulling teeth? And then how you adopt that and adapt to those certain ways. So I love this comparison, or just this kind of play off of my dad is stronger than your dad type of a thing. My circle's better than your circle. So we totally get that, symbols and the look of plans should be your own. But what we should also be considering is, what are you actually gaining from the way that you're doing stuff, and um, what we're actually leaving up to the contractor, because that's the ultimate person that's going to be doing this project. It doesn't matter how we think it looks on the plan. How's it going to get installed, and what do we really want to leave up to the contractor at that point? And we can talk about notes and call outs and legends and all that kind of stuff, but if we're going to just take that simple snapshot of an area, who's going to know what in the world's going on in the bottom versus what's going on up at the top? So just something to consider as we are looking at, upgrading and updating those standards to be more universal. Not only universal, but there is some lingo in the irrigation industry that leads to some more typical and more standard practices of reading stuff. So, another good point on this right here is what you had access to when you first started your standard versus how and what's available now. So are you just sticking with what you're used to and that's just how you've done it from now on? Or are you able to then grow and understand that there are practices and features and tools to do the same work or deeper level of work without doing any more extra effort on your part? So that leads us really into, what if it's not your standards? How in the world are you going to match those? And what are you looking for? So this, in a nutshell, is some of the key things that generally end up on plans that you are required to match in one fashion or another. We won't be going over all of these, and we really are going to be focusing on more of the blocks and stuff like that. So really understanding that what we should end up with after we start to set up the specific standards for a certain client, say the DOT, is we should be able to have a set of layer states that we can pull, templates that we can use specific for these projects, and then really from a maintaining and updating and just cross-checking what we have that we're using for the blocks and the symbols is some type of master block file. So when we say, you know what, I like that look and we need to go update it, we know right where we need to go. Same thing goes to then what blocks are going to be placed. That pulls into then some land effect specific things with how our preference set is going to be set up and what kind of project template we have that already has some of our predefined equipment and stuff like that, blocks already set, so that we can just, again, that boilerplate start up and go from there. So where and how do we make these changes? We are going to move over to CAD now, unless there are any questions, Jared.
We got a great question, and I was able to answer that. We'll show that at a later time, and another one just popped in. But I'm gonna get these queued up for you.
Okay.
And we get a chance, so you keep going with your flow.
Very good. So let me get over to CAD here. Now I'm just showing you sort of at the end of this workflow what we should kind of have in here, and there's always things that we can add to this, but what I've got here is a folder, and this folder again can be because it isn't from the perspective of a firm that has a specific standard that they don't want to really mess up because they're doing so many other projects in their own standard that they don't want to tweak their own symbols and really mess up their workflow. This folder is kind of then isolated as, if I'm going to work on projects for this specific DOT or additional client, that this is where that kind of resource goes. So really organizing things in a way that kind of houses everything so that you don't have to really mess up the integrity of your land effects installation. So just as a little snapshot, we have a project, LFX project here that we've kind of created as a backup, and this is going to have our heads, our valves, our drip, all of our different pieces of equipment that we've kind of customized and tweaked to read the way that we need it to read. So whether it's just saying typical pop-up and rotors, or a gate valve or a ball valve, all of that kind of stuff is really just set up into a project. When it comes to the fonts and all the other styles and stuff that you're kind of required to use, on the specific website for said DOT, we're going to show this as an example, but they should have a standard that they're trying to kind of enforce, which should have a lot of the stuff, which includes the fonts that they're going to be using and stuff like that. So to be able to have that reference point of all those that you can load into your CAD installation is super important, because then as we start to use land effects, we can just assign the right fonts and it's going to, assign appropriately. So having that as a reference, but then going into our templates and stuff like that. So before I actually go into this, I did want to show one thing. So depending on how you get files from other people, or you're trying to bring in other people's blocks and stuff like that, there could be a potential that they have either everything nested into one folder, or sorry, one DWG, and that DWG has all of the different blocks available for them. So how do you actually sift through that and see kind of a snapshot of what's in there? A good little resource is the Design Center in AutoCAD. And what this does is it does allow you to go into, a said area. So for example, I beforehand took a folder of actual blocks from a specific DOT, and I can actually see these items here. Now, it's got a little bit of a limited preview, and they're not always good, so I'd say take it with a grain of salt. So you can either show things by this, but you can start to get an idea of what's actually in here. Now, again, this is super rough to look at, and you don't quite know what it says and stuff like that. So without doing any work, that was a pretty easy way to see what it all consists of. But I want to kind of show we're not going to really do it, but I'm going to show you what Batchman is able to do. You're able to add a file, add a folder, even take and make a slide, so a preview slide, and save that into a specific location. So I'm going to show you the result of that, but Batchman is able to take and open up every one of those, shoot the slides so that we can actually preview it at a reasonable look, and come up with this. So I'm going to go over to where I actually saved that deal here. And you can see this is a lot easier to see. And at this point, I could actually start placing these blocks to really see how they insert. So I have all of these already now as individual blocks, and I can place them and see really what they do, how they function, and stuff like that. So just simply auditing what you have to work with and understanding what you have to work with is a super crucial step. So really utilizing, this is what we're going to be using today, and I'm going to go into this a lot further, but really utilizing our blocks section to organize and manage specific standards. So being able to see what kind of standards we are holding ourselves to just right off the bat is going to allow us to translate that over to using it in our irrigation design stuff. So with that, I am going to open up a couple things here. So this irrigation design file, this is actually our default way that we standardize and reference and update and make new all of our different symbols that are being used for everything. And to have this kind of level of detail is just super, super crucial. So you can actually see exactly what kind of symbol is going to be going in and what block name it's going to be at, and just reference this point back to where those source files are. So this is the kind of level that when we talk about a standard and how we're able to look at what they're going to kind of look at or look like, and then how we can even then start to update things as time goes on. This is the kind of structure that I'm talking about. But what I was able to do as we were looking at this is really trying to understand what your standard is. So we'll consider this my original standard, and what we've got to try to match and what that actually means. So finding like pieces of equipment and really lining them up to where we understand, okay, when I'm doing a flow meter, this is what I've got to make it look like instead of this. When I'm actually doing my water meter or my point of connection, I've got to make it look like this instead of this. So how do we actually do that kind of stuff? So once we actually have an understanding of that, and we go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and open this template right here, because this is what we're going to kind of base our stuff off of, is I've kind of got some predefined blocks in this drawing as what I want to save into the system that I can just drop in all together. So what I've done, and we'll go into a couple other examples here in just a second, but I've already, and we'll open up our properties. You can see that I've already named each one of these blocks. Actually, even though it's not my own block, I've named it to the same block as I would normally name my other standards, the ones that exist in my land effects folder. So if we're just simply trying to match somebody else's standard, this is a great way to sort of set up their blocks, but with your block naming structure, so that you don't have to put these in your land effects folder. They won't get used anywhere else other than the projects that you actually want them to be used. So it makes it very, very smooth and seamless. So anyways, this is sort of what we're going to be pulling from and creating when we talk about needing to stick with a certain standard. Now, we're going to take this with a grain of salt, and it is what it is, but my standard is that I have literally one symbol that identifies a spray pop-up, a shrub spray pop-up. No matter what radius I put, no matter what arc I put, it's the same symbol. So again, how easy is that for the contractor to read on the plan? But how easy is it for us to actually identify and pick out the right quantities and all that kind of stuff? So what I did is I took from my main resource kind of what my symbols used to look like, and I took that structure and I just replaced each one of these blocks with my own single block. And this might be a little confusing, so I apologize for if this is jumping around a little bit. But that's what we have to do to any one of our radiuses, because land effects, again, is really focused on placing things by nozzle, not just by a head specifically. So we still need to place a nozzle, which means we do need a unique block for each one. So that's why we're kind of setting it up this way. But at the end of the day, it will look just like we want it to here. So same thing, if we just want a single flood bubbler with just a flow to it and not the specific nozzles for the flood bubbler or the options and stuff like that, that's how we're going to be able to do that, is just set up our unique blocks and name them what we would if we were normally doing a project. So with that in mind, we also need to match our valve callouts. That's another huge one that really differs from stuff like that. So as it pertains to symbology here, also pertains to, you know, the callouts that we use, the text styles that we use and stuff like that. So if we're gonna put a pin in this for a second, this is all project based, and what goes into our irrigation manager, we do need to know how those are going to look size wise, font wise, all that kind of stuff. And that's really in our preferences. So if we were to go to our irrigation preferences, we can see that this is that boilerplate that's going to be used for everything. So we should not be using our normal standard preference set to make these modifications. We absolutely need to make a new preference set. And if we didn't have anything other than this one, being able to hit manage and hit new, it's going to copy the settings that we already have from ours. So it starts us at a specific point, and it allows us to make another preference set specific to whatever it is we're going to do. I don't need to do that because I already have one kind of set up. But you're going to notice that I can now set up unique symbol families that I want to sort of pull from or use as a reference point. I can now set my unique valve callout to the way I want it, and we can see that obviously this doesn't match our full standard, so why don't we go ahead and show you how to actually customize this so that it's there and able to choose. So we're going to, these are the block names, and we're going to basically take one of these that might be close to what it looks like, or not even at all, and we'll just recreate it. So we can take Valveco 5, and we're going to update that guy here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my land effects folder. I'm going to go into the blocks, into graphics, irrigation, and I'm going to go find that actual call out. So if we decided that we wanted just to go to the next one available, I'll go ahead and I'll open up. We have a right and we have a left. So that is one thing that we got to obviously keep in mind, is the right and the left version of those. So I can just basically open this guy, and I will open the right side of that, and we'll start making our changes here. While I get this ready, Jared, is there anything you want to interject with?
No, I think you're doing good. We just, do got a couple great questions. When I said try to save time
Okay.
at the end.
Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do is, we obviously want these new call outs to be comparable to what we have already existing here. So I'm going to use this as a reference. I just moved it up, and I'm going to take one of these calls. Now these are these attributes here, and these attributes definitely we have a whole list of attributes that are allowed in callouts for valves and stuff like that. So I'm not going to get too far into it, but what we can do now is I'm just going to go ahead and make a copy of this guy, and I'm going to bring him down. I'm going to make sure he is set to multiple line, and I'm going to double click on him, and I'm going to start putting in additional deals. So maybe I need the actual valve number, or sorry, size to go first. So I can say size. I can say valve number. I can say heads is a great one that we just added. And I can say GPM. So being able to put several attributes into one attribute is going to be how we basically make this happen. So if I do that, you're going to see that he's obviously a lot longer now. And my standard is we're going to make sure that that we match this here. So I'm going to go ahead and do a polyline. And I'm just going to recreate roughly what this is going to look like. Okay. So that's what I want it to look like. I can even then modify things to be, you know, on the proper layers and stuff like that that I want. But now I got to definitely move it into the right spot. So I can get rid of this guy. I've got him. And since he's the left call out, he's going to be pulling from essentially this side here. So I'm going to move him from here and move him to 0, 0. So if I was going to have a leader on there, this is what it would look like. That's going to be my kind of my reference point. So I can zoom extents, and I can M slide to make a slide for this area. So we actually want this thing to be called Valveco 6. So we're going to go ahead and save him. And I'm just going to save time, and I'm going to copy this guy from a different spot here. So now I can go ahead and go over to my right. I'm going to paste it at 0, 0. Now, the one thing I didn't make sure of, and it's actually good still, but is how it's justified, the font, how it's justified, how it's going to roll and fit within this thing. So, you know, there might be some tweaks that we need to do, but it looks like I'm centered, so that's great. I can do a little test of a polyline to see that's where my right's going to come. I can also zoom extents and M slide, make him number 6 as well. And so he's good here. So I don't want to save over this one, right? Because we just did it as 6. So I'm going to just do a save as. And I'm going to plop a 6 in there as well. Do that same thing to here. All right, so now I have two unique or two new callouts that we just created for that. And the really cool thing about this is now I can take this, if I even need to now show these callouts as proposed versus existing callouts for valves, I can just simply make a copy, make it number 7, turn this to dashed or break it so that it's a nice dashed look. And we've already got now a new call out for our existing stuff. So the only thing different here that I see is I really haven't matched the standard from a font style. So we can see that call out title is being used here. And the really nice thing about this is if I go ahead and make sure I'm set here, and we make sure this is set to my proper fonts for that deal, it's actually going to update itself automatically. Now, it looks like it's sizing it up over it, but I'm sure that my size is actually going to fit within this pretty well. And we can make those adjustments if needed. So I'm going to leave it as is, but I'm just going to make sure that I set the right text style. Oh, try that again. Clicking too fast. There we go. All right, so I'm going to save that again just because we changed that font. And we are going to close these guys. So there's one other spot that I've got to make it kind of view or show, because if I go to my preferences again and I go to try to pick that new valve callout that we just did, you're going to notice that he still doesn't exist, is because these are referencing our schedule symbol block. So if we simply go over to our callouts, I'm just going to grab the right version of that block right there, and I'm going to copy him, and I'm going to go over to schedule symbols, and I'm going to paste him. So what this does, this schedule block, and what this benefit is if I'm going to, if I'm going to actually have this show up on a schedule, I would want this to kind of point to these things and say what they are, type of a deal. So I could clean it up if I wanted to. For this purpose, I'm not going to. I'll just leave it as is. But if we go ahead and come back over, you're going to see now we've got that that new version. So this could be our default, and we can say OK. And now for this preference set, I will have a new call out there. Should have changed. Huh. Do you know why it's not changing, Jer? Sorry.
You know,
it was changing for me before, so I
did you
I'll have to look at that. But
change it to something else and change it back or something? I'm not sure. That's
that changed.
Well, I should.
Okay.
It should still come in. So
Yeah, it'll come in. So we'll just leave that for now. Sorry. So we've now made a custom block, and you know, when it comes to like all the dash stuff, and you'll see this even in our blocks here where we've got our dash stuff, to simplify it, to remove the element of line type scale and stuff like that for simple things like this, my recommendation is not to make it a line type, but to make it individual lines. So it'll basically be no matter what scale you're doing it at and any of your settings and stuff like that, because it can confuse you as you go if you don't have things set up that way. So the blocks are made. We've got a few examples here. Let's go ahead and just sort of get things placed into the drawing. Let's see how this works. So I'm going to just start out pretty simple, and I just want to show what is happening when I actually have even my preference set that we've kind of set up basically just like this without doing anything, because we haven't really tied the changes and the different blocks and stuff to what we're doing here. So this is what kind of makes it really fancy here, is we can actually add, let's just add a turf rotor real quick. And again, we can assign specific symbols here. So this is the kind of, at this specific position is where we want to start thinking about what our normal symbols look like, because this is pulling from our database, and what we want from a block naming perspective, what we want our new blocks to be named so that we can pull as a reference. So if I know that my rotors for, let's just say, part circles are going to be, you know, one block, I can set my part circle symbol as A104, my full circle as A105, and that's a rotor pop-up, let's just say. So we're going to add it just like this, and I'm going to show you the comparison here. So we'll say okay. and we'll add him in there. So he's just added as that piece of equipment. But if you remember, we've got a few of our own kind of symbols that we want to use instead of those. So you can see that I've got a nice way that I can see what my different styles are that I'm trying to adhere to. So if you look, I've named that block A104. Even though it's not named that way in my land effects folder, I've got him defined that way in this specific master template file for my DOT work. Okay, so if I look at that and I have A105, I got A101, A102, so I know these are going to be how I kind of start to set up my project, my equipment. And as soon as I have those set, they're already predefined set for those other symbols, but it's really the block name that we're concerned about. Because what we can do is we can take all of this content and we can use our site tool. So referring back to the beginning when I was saying the blocks section is a really good place for us to save this kind of content. So once we have like our whole setup, how we want things to look, and defined as specific block names, I can go ahead and I can save this as an entire block. So it's asking me to pick an insertion point, so I'll go ahead and pick here. And now where do I want to put it? So this is where I get to even go into in my own structure of how I want to organize this stuff. But under discipline graphics is a good user defined section that I've made a few different DOT areas. So depending on how you want it to look, go ahead and place it into this structure. Now I've got a few in here already saved. So this is the guy here. So we'll just overwrite him here. But what you're going to notice is it tries to do a preview, and this preview is based on what's in the drawing here, and we've obviously got a lot. So we're going to reshoot that slide in a second. But we can set it to dim scale, which means I can place it into my model space of my design, and I can start to test how those even look right off the bat. So we'll just go ahead and say okay to that. But we're also going to go ahead and open up that block that we just made. So we're going to go into that same folder structure. And you can see this is where it is. So I'm going to bring him into view. And I'm going to do an M slide to this, just like we did for our callout. And I'm going to replace that slide file. So now, if we were to look at what that actually looks like, you can see that he's a lot better than whatever that preview was before. So we'll go ahead and leave him that way, but we'll also go ahead and bring in this set. So if we go into our user defined, pick this guy and define him in the drawing, you can see that now this is going to be at, and again, I've set my scale. You know, there's other things that we should already know from setting up projects and stuff, but this is how the blocks are already going to be looking. So that's a really good indication of how it is. And you can see if I explode this guy, these are now defined in the drawing as said blocks, even our spray symbols. So we can actually add, if we go ahead and add a new shrub spray, and we'll go ahead and pick him. This is where we get to be able to, again, set that project, those parameters there. So if it's something that we're trying to say, something like that, typical shrub pop-up, and clean up the description how you want it. This is how we start to kind of isolate unique pieces of equipment for this specific type of project. We'll say okay. Now, granted, I only did the 10-foot radius, so you'll notice if I go ahead and try to place this guy here, and I place an 8.5, he's my normal symbols that I have in my land effects folder. But since we've defined those in the drawing already, I've now got the ability to place all of these different options just like this, just like I would normally be able to with land effects, and have the ability to really hone in the design. Or come along here, and we'll go ahead and we'll go down to a 10/2 for this example, but to be able to take and go and lay out things much faster than what we would normally be able to do in a plan like this. But really, really starting to harness in the power of actually designing stuff while still sticking with this. Even though I never changed a single thing in my land effects folder, just simply dropping this initial block in allowed me to do this, which means I could set up a project that had all my stuff that I normally use, and I could actually use this, which again, take it for what it's worth, or with caution, literally be able to pick that same project without any other changes and stuff like that, and place this, and you'll notice that my 10/2 is not that symbol anymore, even though I'm using the same exact equipment. It's because I have predefined the symbol as land effects this way, instead of first dropping in that discipline graphics blocks that define that block already in the drawing, which means we can set up templates to make it even faster. We can set up templates with those blocks already placed into paper space or off to the side, ready for you to just open up and go. So I am going to pause here because we are starting to get close on time, Jer. Do we want to go back on anything here, or?
Let's see. Well, if you wanted to go ahead and just wrap up, I got these 2 questions ready. I want to get this third one ready for you. So while you're wrapping up.
Perfect. Okay. So again, as we start to look at, and I think this is a really clear indication, just being able to snapshot or start to hone in on your own standards. So this was from the perspective of a user trying to adhere to a specific standard. But even then, looking at your own standards and setting them up in a fashion that kind of is we'll call it forward thinking and thinking of others. How are they going to adapt to these standards easily? Trying to set up some fashion of this in a way that is easy to read and a way to kind of streamline that whole process is definitely, I would say, a lifesaver on all ends. So if anybody has like suggestions or worries or frustrations that they've put out for this, let us know, because it's just super important to be able to get the work done and not have to worry about trying to figure out how you're actually going to adopt them. But we have tools to do that. So the same thing then goes to, as we're setting all this stuff up, setting up the projects and stuff like that, to have templates. Now, we sort of touched on that right at the first. I showed you a deal here. Oops, let me get over to it. And if we had templates given to us, we run the risk of getting this kind of stuff. We stress here at Land Effects corruption and proxies and that kind of stuff, and cleaning drawings. And this just gives us a really good chance to start eliminating some of this stuff that's going on here. This is just a template. This doesn't have anything in it, and this is full of different things. So how do we try to minimize that while still benefiting from all of our things that they've already preset up, or what we want to preset up for things like that. And last thing I want to show is just a really cool tool, and because if we go to we'll go to this drawing too that I have, where I really don't have any of the right layers in here. How do I actually get them in without drawing lines and then copying them into this project and potentially bringing over the corruption that way? Well, to be able to have a way to save specific layer states, I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder in here. We'll call it my DOT standards. And within this folder, I'm going to go ahead and say this is all my CT roadway layers. We'll say all. So I know specifically in this drawing, I had all of those layers, and I want to just save all those. So that's all that I had to do. I can go back to my other drawing, and I can use the load layer states button. And it allows me to now pick through. It loads them all in, and it brings them in with all of their settings the way that they were set up. So now I have a really clean way that I can start doing this. I can start deleting, layers out and sectioning them out into different layer state names so that I'm not getting everything, but I can now start pulling what I need. So liken this unto what irrigation layers do we want to have standard. Obviously there are some in the preference set that we would hold to, and the colors that those get and stuff like that. But any additional layers that we want to start wrapping into our templates, this is a really good tool. So we'll stop there. We've got a few minutes to do some questions. So what do we got?
Fantastic. So I really liked this this question. I'm sorry, I'm trying to remind myself of scrolling. It was Jesse. Really interesting is getting a character in the pipe line type. And so basically Jesse says they have to put a T in the lateral pipe that goes to the tree areas and so on. So it's basically saying that well, you could use our custom line type to create the line -T line type, and then assign that in the pipe data, as you were about to show with the line type thing.
Yeah, so let's just say this is a perfectly normal piped situation, so don't judge it. It's accurate. So we've got this guy here, and what I didn't put, let's just go ahead and finish this valve or this zone out actually. You'll notice that this is not my standard valve symbol that I want, and that's because I actually didn't define that block. Let me redo that, not to sidetrack here, but I have it all set up. You might as well bring it in and use it. So there he is. Let's just place that valve one more time. And now it's my pretty valve that I want here. So with that, and how we can do that, and this might be too small of sections, so we'll see actually what this actually does. I'll move it here just in case. So there's that. Is we have this custom line tool. So based on the active layer here, so if we go to our LI pipe, and I go here, are we doing a little t or a big T?
I guess a big T. Let's do a big
T.
Yeah.
Say okay. It's automatically going to convert that active layer to that line type automatically, which is actually just one of my favorite things, I think. Super cool. So that is there, and obviously then what you're saying is save that into the save layer states as that specific, because in its properties you're going to see now he's set to line T. So you could set up all of your land effects layers and stuff like that with any of the custom things here. And if you load those in, it's going to since it's already defined in the drawing, it's going to use those first and look just like you want it that way. So we've got him in there. Let's just double check that I have the right call out assigned to this guy, which I don't. So we'll set him and let's give him a shot, shall we? Okay, go ahead and do that. Oh, no, he's not pulling that guy. So why did he not pull that guy? Do you want to ask your other question while I?
Oh, it's well, the other one is relating to valve callout. So I think if you want
showing this one, shoot. Oops. So we're going to go to our callouts here. Let's see why Valveco 6. Oh, he's good.
it could be. I mean, I don't know if you don't have any other valve callouts defined in the drawing.
No. Oops. This is all I have. So try to troubleshoot this. It was working just before, ironically.
Well, you can have it set to the valve. Let me go ahead and just see.
Valveco. Oh, I know why. I know why. Look at me and my troubleshooting skills. I made one big boo-boo, and that was in my schedule symbol. I left Valveco as -R, not _SS. That defines it as a schedule symbol. Curses for copying things.
Ha.
So this will work now. It all makes sense. Garbage in, garbage out. Okay, so let's just double check this guy here. He's good. All right, now I can label it. Aha. Yep. So there he is. And you can see he obviously doesn't have a flow yet. So why don't we go ahead and size this guy? There you go.
And then related to the valve callout was the other question, which I really liked this one from Amanda. If you want to go ahead and just erase that callout, we'll put in another one. But she was saying their standard is to put a number in the area. For her, it's a drip area, but it'll work for this, that correlates with the valve number. And I was thinking, well, you could place the valve callout right next to the valve, right click for no arrow, and then move the number indicator over there. That could be a solution to do that.
Okay, so you're saying if I do this, place it right here, hit escape.
No, you need a right click.
Oh, because you want the identifier.
You want the number indicator.
Got it. Sorry. Okay. So you want it here, right click, and then move this guy over here.
Yeah, so that way, and then maybe put a circle around him or something. I don't know, but that way, you have that, and maybe even make that more bold or something. I don't know however their standard is. I would kind of have to see if that does match the sort of look of their standard.
Yeah. So yeah, you could tweak things in the list here.
But then, changing the valve number will update that piece of text. That's the whole beauty of it.
Yeah, yeah. So he changes to B1. Oh,
Um, what did you do?
I might have tweaked its.
Okay, well, anyway, well, normally it does.
Yeah, normally it does. I don't know what you did, Jer. Terrible suggestion. No. Anything else? I think we're right on. X copy.
Yeah, and then so basically, I think that really got some people going on. Ooh, that's a neat technique. Well, obviously, we're gonna play with that a little and see what we can do. As for X copy, no, X copy would not let you make multiple of it. It's it's an interesting idea to this is the first we're hearing of it. So like with anything, we don't have that capability built in, but we'll fiddle with that more. I think that basically covers us on these questions. So yeah, obviously got a few that I wasn't able to mention out loud, but I did type answers to those other people. I hope that was good. I think it looks like we had some good interest. I'm sure if you guys think of more questions, please email us. We may very well need a kind of a follow up on this because it's obviously a very large topic with a lot we can go over. But other than that, I think I'm just going to wish everybody goodbye and have a good weekend.
All right. Thanks, guys.